Okay, we're back with the stream. We just had the reference group meeting informally, and that may still continue if we want to, but we're back into just discussing briefly some animation aspects. So let's see. No, you don't really see it, so let's do it individually. Animator 1 and set interpolator. Set interpolator. New bounce interpolator. Just want to try show you an example of an interpolator. Hopefully works. Let's see. Doesn't seem to do much. Bit of did it bounce? Did you see it bouncing? Yeah, that's a, okay. That should have happened exactly. So, but that's the idea. So you can interpolator that have some additional animations at the end of the overall animation, or they interpolate between time. For example, one other interpolator which is quite useful is the Accelerator Interpolator. So it actually speeds up over time. So it starts slower and then speeds up the animation. Yes, but the bouncing one is basically bouncing at the end of the animation as well. And you can of course write your own by implementing the interface, interpolator interface, and edit simply, similar to the reverse interpolator we just had, right? So you have some interpolation mechanism. You need to figure out what to do with it, right? You get a value, and then you need to perform some sort of transformation, and then provide the result back to the user. Cool. So sets, nested sets, sequential execution, parallel execution, property modification, interpolators. Yeah. So those are roughly the elements you want to use at best anyway. So it's most of that is somewhat covered. One aspect before we, because I fear that we run out of time otherwise, is just to look at the idea of transitions, because there are also forms of animation, of course, and let me just minimize this. They should also be discussed briefly, so you have some sort of idea. Again, the pain there comes down to the fact that Android has developed so many versions with so many different device forms, factors, and so on, that there's also a lot of different ways of doing transitions. And my intent here is again to show you the easiest ways that you can probably use them as far as I've explored and observed. So the first thing, transitions and animations, or any resources related to that, are held in a resource folder as well. So it will not be obvious from the base set of resource folders that are available, but there is another called the animation folder. You can't just create it in the file system itself. You actually need to create it via the UI, so it's properly added to the build system as well. Otherwise, your system won't do what is expected to. And just to show you the brief idea of how it works behind the scenes. Patience. Really need to work on my Zen here. So there you go. Okay. All right. So transitions between activities. So the idea is there. We need to have some sort of the animation folder, and then specify the transition animations in XML, right? So using the fixed format. For example, here, yeah. What does that animation possibly do? If you guess. Want to guess? Yeah. Anyone? XML. Any guess as what this will probably do, looking at the terminology and the properties?
They picked along the x-axis.
Can you repeat that?
They picked along the x-axis.
Yeah, you sure?
I'm guessing translated to the left by 100% of whatever p is.
Okay. So translation, yeah, that's the keyword, which the translate keyword gave it away, probably, right? The direction, just think about the direction again. So the idea is quite straightforward, right? So we have a translation that takes takes a particular a fixed amount of time. So it actually references back to the default medium animation time provided by Android. You have a long and short one as well. So it's good, then it's all managed by the system and not so much individualized by you like we did right now. We hacked it all into the code. And then it's an X translation from delta minus 100%. So meaning from outside of the screen, device independent, onto the screen. So it's basically, it should be a slide-in functionality that you have there. Okay, so we need to have this kind of specification, and there are heaps out there on the web. So you can just take them, modify them, adjust them to your likings. Generally, those sliding activities are probably quite amenable to modifications and general use. But also they have one advantage because they kind of are good for navigation. They actually guide the user through the application. Those sliding transitions are quite intuitive in that respect. So the key of actually setting up the transition animations in the individual activities is simply to override the transition animations functionality. Of course, you can all specify it in XML, but this is not as device independent as it possibly should be. So, so this should be the easy, quite relatively straightforward way. I'll copy in some of the transition animations that I have at hand. So let's see, and then I'll just show them to you. Oh, that didn't go well. Ah, God. My API is still trying to copy files. Yeah, OBS is taking quite a chunk out of my CPU time here. So, okay. Anyway, come on, can't take that long. I really don't feel like typing XML right now, but let's see. Yeah, I have to. I don't know. All right, let's do the error-prone typing from hand kind of approach. Let's see how it goes. So don't type XML, no point. So again, that wasn't planned. That was just my system not cooperating. Encoding and end of XML. Ah, it came back to me. So good. Override. So, okay. Thank you, Windows. Right, so this is the basic idea, right? So you have an XML file and you specify an animation set in this case, but we only have one animation in there, which is the translation you just saw, for example, and you know, a few other ones. So you can basically add new animations quite flexibly here. So the idea is now, if you, for example, have a transition between different activities, so let's have another one, main activity 2. Yeah, not a class, but an activity. So extends activity. So cool, that's about right. On create. That's about right as well. Okay. So going to import this one here. Now I need to do it because I also need to have a user interface, so I probably need to do it the proper way. Otherwise we don't see much if we do animations. It's very boring. So activity and empty activity, and we call it main activity 2. We don't want backwards compatibility in this case, and just add it here as well. So okay, cool. So now we have the content view and everything else. And the idea is there now that you can basically just go as simple as straightforward as overriding the, yeah, that was that. My build system is updating. And what you see, you have two options here. One is to specify, I hope that's somewhat legible, the enter animation, the exit animation. So you can override the animations that are associated with this particular activity, and you just identify them quite straightforward using this very mechanism. I'll just pick some random ones right now here. So uname slide out left. Okay. So right, so it still doesn't help me further. Obviously need to start the activity, so let's pick one of the other buttons. Create intent. Intent, new intent, and then this is get application context, and then main to activity class, and then start. Intent. So, but instead of putting it in the, we put it later in a different context. Instead of putting it here, you can actually specify it whenever you start the secondary activity. Important thing, however, is you need to specify it after the calling start activity, because only then the activity will be resolved, and then only then the animation will be associated with the particular activity. And we'll see if that actually works. So I picked button 2. I hope that's that one here. And there's something going on. So there was some resemblance of an activity, at least for moving in. So let's see, slide in. Cool. So now we have a relatively clean activity transition that we can use. And you see, by intuition, it actually helps with user guidance, right? So because we can indicate direction, so you have the navigation case. But you notice when you actually press back, it will still have the default animation of just fading out to the bottom. So we need to override that as well. And how do we deal with this? Any intuitions? Yeah, you're asleep. Okay. Admittedly, it's Friday and it's me talking. That's 2 reasons to be asleep. So, right. So, well, right. So you have a kind of virtualize the surface if you want. So you seemingly have more estate by providing this functionality. Hang on. The activity itself, the main activity itself, right now doesn't have. Call it unim button demo. That's the default approach. Of course, if we want to have the main activity itself have this functionality, we need to use it in the onCreate. Here. Again, all that stuff is specifiable purely via XML as well, but again, largely version dependent and kind of buggy. And sometimes functionality is simply not available. Right. So that went well. So we actually saw the enter animation for the animation button thing. So that was different. There was the re-enter animation. So I think I need to clear that out properly. Rebuild this properly. Should see a slide. Yeah, some slides seemingly happening there as well, and then we can navigate further by going to the application and finding our way back. I think there were 2 animations overlapping, one of them of the second animation, one of them of the first animation. Anyway, so yeah, so it's basically quite straightforward, right? So no magic, right? So if you want, so you can actually refine your transitions and interaction with your system. Again, the only thing you actually need to consider is that you need to create a resource folder from the IDE and add the corresponding animations here. So, and then, you know, mix and match them, use them in your application if you like. That's, yeah, that's pretty much the core of this. Is there anything else I wanted to share? Right, yes. So Android, in addition to that one, I put the slides up and they have a lot of links that actually point to the Android resources associated with all those elements. Whereas I must admit though, the one for the property animations is actually not super clear, because it points into my view very different directions of configuration. So whereas if you take the straightforward way, it's actually quite easy to have property animations, but they will guide you through a lot of XML and a configuration and then linking it to Java code and so on, which seems overly complex. So it's probably just easier to define it in your application itself. In addition to those individual transitions that are just showcased here using the animations for selected activities, you can also combine this and have transitions that are applied to a scene. And that means to basically that you define a layout as it should be defined in the beginning and at the end, and then apply a mechanism that mitigates this transition, and then you can have those scene transitions applied to your application. So it actually changes the layout, for example, in a sophisticated way over time. And it also applies across the hierarchy of scenes as well. So if you have multiple activities, you can apply a fixed set of transitions to those ones and do those across a hierarchy as well, right? So if you have nested activities, for example. So that's one of the other more advanced features that you can do with transitions as well, on top of those simple swipe in, swipe out animations. Because right now with few activities, like the ones you probably have, which is probably 2 or 3 activities, I guess it's very straightforward to do it by hand. But if it's a bit more involved, then it's worthwhile looking at the description as provided by Google in that respect, because they're quite a bit more involved, and also cover the relationship to the material design specifications, in how far transition, how long they should last, how what you should avoid, and which ones are desirable. Internet, be with me. Yes, it's coming. So that would be a good thing to think about, so you can group animations and basically, yeah, create complex layouts where you have actually a first scene and a second scene, and you want to facilitate the for example, you want to change the order in which those elements appear. So in this example, we have a relative layout. I'll just bring in the zoom it in a bit. A relative layout with 2 text views, for example, and you want to swap the order. So you define 2 scenes, scene A, scene B, in which the order is inverted, and then you just combine those and create a scene, basically, right? So and then you can apply particular transitions to those. So again, it's about fading, some sort of the default transition animation that's associated with this. So that's another way of going about it, right? So you can change the user interfaces and have the system decide the default transition. So it's quite convenient if you want to just specify one form of transition apply to all your activities or all your layouts, if you like. Cool. Yeah, so have a look at this. I mean, I put the slides up and the links are all in there if you're interested anyway, but I think from a lecture point of from a practical use point of view, the examples that I gave probably should be reasonably clear. Please.
So with the transition between the activities,
yeah,
could one of them be like a null value? So you only have like only the slide in, not the slide out of the activity?
It will, yes, you can do that, but if you do that, then you have you fall back to the default transition, which is just fading out to sliding out to the bottom.
So then you need to have a transition animation that does nothing, basically, no varieties.
Yep. You would need to have a. I think there's something like destroy. I think there's an explode animation you can look at, which is spreading all directions. But I think a simple vanish approach. I'm not sure. I would need to look it up. You would override the default transition. Yes, that's right. So, but you need to specify one. Otherwise, it will use the system default, which is, as you saw, and it can change between different phones, right? So it could be different for the Pixel emulator that I have here, as opposed to a Nexus, for example, right? So it will always fall back. If nothing specified, system defaults. Any other thoughts? There's not much magic here, I think. Anything else I want to point you to? Anyway, if you want to use animations, think about using them wisely, and there's a lot of different animation XMLs out there that you can just use. Just be mindful when they give instruction on how to use them. That's sometimes inconsistent, and especially if your tutorials point to Android 4, that's kind of to be used with care. Everything especially the latter part, we had been looking at is from Lollipop, meaning Android 5 onwards mostly, yeah, in a fully functional way. Okay. Good. Other than that, I think I'm done. Reference group ideas, any more comments you have in mind? If anything, put it in the wiki. Next week, similar pattern, so if you want to wrap up your labs, you can do that on Thursday. Of course, there will not be explicit new content. On Friday, we'll probably look a bit into graphics on Androids to some extent, how it's different from the OpenGL course or OpenGL that you, for example, know, but also perhaps a bit of outlook, what's coming next, perhaps even after Android, because there's some developments on the horizon that point to Google changing its direction possibly. So we'll look at those things. But yeah, that's it for now. So thank you for attending in the first place. Cool. Yep. I need to grab Yona in a second.